All right, let's talk about the Flutter event, just to refresh your memory. So once this thing does the thing with the particles, you can see that sort of flapping motion. That's all procedural. So that's what I'm gonna show you here. So what this is gonna do is, it's got two things. The timeline has got one graph that goes from like 0 to 8 over, or 0 to 6 over a period of 8 seconds. And then for, there's another graph here called reduction, which goes from 1 to 0 over the same period of time. So the way this works is we're generating a sine wave. And then for each element in the array, which is built manually down here, like this one here is going to be the top piece of geometry on the, whatever one this is, I don't even know, the left side. And then this is the second top and the third top, and it goes all the way from top to bottom. So what's happening is, as we are traveling down that array, each thing is going to get an extra 5 degrees essentially added to it. So let's refresh our memory real quick about how a sine wave works. So as we go around the circle, we take the value, the sine of the degree that we're at. It's going to generate a graph that looks like this red line here, which is a sine wave, right? So every time we go around the circle, we get one cycle of our sine wave. And that sine wave is what I'm going to use to animate the flutter effect. So within the blueprint itself, we've got this Z rotation, which is going to go, if you just imagine the first cycle, however long it takes to get from 0 to 1, right? So that's going to generate, well, that times 360 is going to generate our first sine wave. And then each element here in the array is going to add an additional 5 degrees to that. So each one is going to be like a little bit further in time than the one before it. And then that final value is what we feed into the sine. So this is going to generate, again, that sine wave that's going to go from 0 to 1 to 0 to -1 back to 0. And then we're going to multiply those values by 40. So that's going to give us a 40-degree sweep back and forth initially for every single piece that is slightly offset by 5 degrees essentially around our little circle. And then that's all going to be multiplied here by this reduction. It's going to be a curve that goes from 1 to 0. So like this is essentially just going to gradually reduce the range that we're wiggling back and forth until we finally hit 0 at 8 seconds in. Now we're going to multiply that, or add that to 180, because that's where I ultimately needed to get to. Again, my thing was brought in kind of backwards. We make a rotator, and then we set our world rotation. So that's how the procedural animation works, how we're generating that sine wave and then modifying it over time. Now, the reason there are two of these is because I ran into a little bit of a problem, and I just didn't bother to post a question somewhere, but maybe somebody watching will have an idea. The only difference between these two events is, in the one case, we're multiplying it by positive 40, and in the other case, we're multiplying it by negative 40, and we're using a different array for each one, right? So what would be sort of more object-oriented is I would create this function with some generic inputs, a generic input for this value and a generic input for the array, and then I would call it and then just feed it these values. But when I did that, it was only running one at a time. So kind of let me show you quickly what I'm talking about here. I'm going to add a parameter here, and we'll call this like whatever, rotation val, and this needs to be a float, and it's not an array, it's just a regular one. And then this one is going to be the geo, and this is a scene component array. And we set that to array. All right, so you can see those inputs now. I'm going to plug this into that value, and I will plug this into the array slot there. We can do a compile. Going to break a few things, that's okay. We'll just delete that stuff for now. So now I've got this set rotation vals. I'm sorry, where'd it go? Flutter is down here, I think. Gotta zoom out a bit. I didn't realize how far up it took me. Okay, so now I've got this flutter, and I'm going to set this, rather than being called flutter L, I'm just going to call it flutter. So this is my generic flutter event, right? So now we've got flutter R. I'm going to pull off of here, and I'm going to make a new event. Actually, we'll just call this one my call flutter. Apologies if this is like getting into the weeds a bit, but I think it's useful. All right, so we've got this event called call Flutter, and we've got an event called Flutter. So what I would really like to do is I would have Flutter, call Flutter. And in the first case, I would say you get to be 40, and we'll use this array, right? And then we want the same thing to happen. So we would call it again. We would use this array. And we would set this to -40. And then for call Flutter, we'll go ahead and compile that. Everybody's happy. I think I triggered this. I'm not sure if I'll be able to. Yeah, we go. Okay, so now we'll just go ahead and try to do our Flutter. Actually, I guess it was call Flutter, sorry. I think I wanted to do it off this one. So this event is when we're done, whatever this is, actor rotation, that's what we call Flutter. So compile and save. Let's see if it works. Right, that's what I was getting, is it only gets called one time. So I don't know why that is. I would be delighted if somebody out in internet land knows why I can't do it that way. I'm sure there's something that I'm just missing on the setup. But anyway, it doesn't work, but it was so easy to just duplicate it and change the values and whatever. Not a big deal. Call it as its own event. That's what I did. So anyway, that's how the Flutter stuff works. I think it's pretty cool and not that complicated on the setup side. So there you go. So that is the full breakdown of all of the various components, the sequencer, the Niagara systems, the materials, and the blueprint to create the little spinning logo effect here that we've been looking at. So if you have any questions, please feel free to post a comment or whatever. Be delighted to get into the weeds a little bit further about any of this stuff if anybody out there is curious. Thank you so much for watching.